Chapter 15, June 9th. Dad and Jen took me out to buy a puppy last night. She's sleeping on my lap as I write. She is so adorable, you just can't believe it. She's a basset hound. She's 12 weeks old, and her name is, guess what? Emily. Jen helped me with that. Her ears are so long she trips over them when she walks. She takes a step, trips on her ear, does a somersault, and starts again. I'm allowed to keep her in her kennel in my room as long as she sleeps in it during the night. I couldn't make her last night. She looked way too neglected with her sad eyes and nose sticking out between the bars. I let her curl up next to me on the bed. I mean, seeing as it was her first night away from her mother. As if I don't know what that feels like. It was quite a surprise. I was just coming in from a walk in the canyon. Dad and Jen were sitting at the kitchen table. They had these looks on their faces like they knew something I didn't know. Not something bad, but like something they wanted to tell me, but they were going to have some fun with it first. By playing it real cool. You know the kind of humor, kind of feeble, kind of feeble. So, what's up? Asked Dad when I came in the door. Nothing, I said, and I dropped my backpack on the floor next to the refrigerator. I looked at Jad, then over at Jen. They both had these big smiley eyes. What is up? How was your walk in the park? Dad won't call it the canyon. He won't even hint that it's anything other than this green playing field where, unless you're playing some contact sport, you couldn't possibly get hurt. He hates me going down there. He tried to forbid me at first. We had this big argument when it finally came out that he was afraid I might do what Mom did. We both ended up crying when I told him I had a little bit more common sense than that. It's all right. Mrs. Marshall's still looking for Chrissy. I poured myself a glass of juice. She's got hip waders on and she's stumbling down the creek trying to peer through the water. But she's not looking for Chrissy's body, just Chrissy's pink sweater. She's absolutely convinced Chrissy's still alive. As I answered his question, the smile in Dad's eyes faded. How do you know what she's thinking? I shrugged. I asked her. The thing is, her eyes are so bloodshot, everything she sees must be through a haze of pink. Everything must look like Chrissy's sweater. I finished my juice. So what's up? Dad took a minute to tear himself away from what I had said. He reconfigured his smile. As you know, Pam, I'm not too crazy about you walking in the park all alone. I rolled my eyes. Dad, haven't we been through all that? I'm not going to do anything Dad interrupted me by holding his hand up for silence. So, we're going to get you a companion. Oh, yeah? What kind of companion? Some bald Mr. Clean to walk 5 steps behind me with his thick arms crossed whenever I go, some. See, I was kind of ticked off because Dad said these things sometimes that were really mean in his not so subtle way that he doesn't trust me. And I wish he'd quit it because it's really insulting. Well, and okay, maybe just once in a while it's my fault. Maybe once or twice I've jumped to conclusions. But it weren't for his attitude, I wouldn't get so stressed out. Jen wasn't sure if she should giggle or not, mainly because she doesn't know Dad and his attitude yet, and why I was all hyped up. Dad just glared at me, waiting for my seizure to blow over. No, I was thinking more like a dog. It took me only a second to forgive him. Really? A dog? Really, said Dad. His smile returned. Jen knows a good breeder in Richmond. What do you think? I had wanted a dog for a long time, and Dad knew it. I'd asked for one many times. I'd asked for a kitten, a hamster. I'd even said, well, okay then, how about a white rat? To which Dad had made this face like he had worms in his mouth. A rat? Some people think they're good pets. Yeah, weird people, said Dad. It wasn't that Dad didn't like animals. The problem was Dad's old collie, BB, who died when I was 3. Dad had had him since he was a teenager. He told me he was the smartest dog there ever was. He had a sixth sense. All Dad had to do was think of something he needed, and BB would show up with whatever it was. Like the time Dad was standing on a ladder, fixing the siding on our house, a story I've heard about 100 zillion times in my life. Dad realized he left the hammer in the basement. He started to climb down. Sitting on the ground at the base of the ladder was BB with the hammer in his mouth. Dad knew he couldn't replace BB, so he wouldn't even try. When can we go? How about right now? And that's how I acquired Emily. I could tell right away she was the creative one of the litter. She figured out how to squeak the toy football I gave her faster than any of the other pups. And she was curious, but not pushy, just cautious. I gave all the puppies a treat. Emily sniffed hers, but she watched her brothers and sisters eat before eating it herself. I picked her up. When she licked my cheek, I just knew she was the right one. Then Dad took her, and she licked his cheek. Yep, he said. Everyone's a sucker for a pup. Wait until I tell you about taking her for a walk in the canyon after school today. Well, actually, it was more of a carry. I just wanted to show her around. I carried her to where the wooden bridge crosses the creek. I stayed away from 90 Foot. I thought the roar of the water might scare her to death. Like I said before, it can be pretty terrifying for someone who's not used to it. Even if you are used to it for the first few minutes, it always reminds you of how puny you really are. We walked down to the creek, and we were on our way back up again. I carried her up the 10 billion steps from the bottom of the gorge to the world above. She can't handle steps yet, up and or down. Anyway, guess who's leaning against the railing at the top talking to a couple of friends? I'll give you a hint. I was all hot and sweaty and out of breath, my hair looked like it had been styled by a lightning strike, and I was wearing total grunge clothes in case Emily peed on me. It was Matt Layton, of course, leaning there, all calm and cool, with shoulders gorgeously stooped, and one very wicked smile. I couldn't exactly turn around. So I continued to huff and puff up the steps like some kind of squinty mollusk finding its way out of the dark. I thought it best to keep my head down and talk to Emily. He might not notice me slither right by. It didn't work. I was almost at the top when I saw him make a sign to his friends and move away from them. He was waiting on the top step. Those are killer steps, he said. Here, let me take your puppy while you catch your breath. I was so shocked to hear him speak to me. I didn't mean to, but I clutched Emily tighter to my chest. It's okay. I like dogs. He smiled as I let him have Emily. His grin took what little breath I had left completely away. Say something. Quick, Pam, you doorknob. I dug out this memory of him playing with Mr. Spinelli's German Shepherd Lupus. I know what you like, I wheezed in this hoarse voice like some kind of telephone pervert. I mean, I know you like dogs. Oh yeah? How do you know? Interested, he pet Emily. I saw you. I felt so stupid. He probably thought I'd been following him around. I mean, I passed you on the street and saw you playing with Mr. Spinelli's dog. My breath had returned. Matt seemed quite satisfied with my answer. Ah, well, yeah, well, you have to be heartless not to give him a little attention. He's such a nice dog. He gave Emily a squeeze. Oh, to be Emily in your arms, Matt Layton, to be held against that amazing bod. What's his name? Lupus. Hey, Lupus, he stroked Emily's chin. You've got the same name as Spinelli's dog. Oh, no, he's Emily. I mean, he's a she. She's Emily. I thought you were still talking about Lupus, Mr. Spinelli's dog, because, since we were talking about him, oh, this is good. Keep blundering on, Pam. I'm sure he's really impressed by now. Matt was laughing. He spoke to Emily. Tell her not to sweat it, Emily. Know what? I like your name. It's musical. He looked at me. What's yours? Mine? I punched my finger to my chest. Matt studied my face. He studied the woods behind me. He looked over one, then the other shoulder. He glanced to his left, then to his right. Clearly, as any numbskull could see, there was no one else around. Grinning, he looked back at me. Yeah, yours. Pamela Collins. My name's Matt Layton. No duh, as if I didn't know. Hi, Matt. Listen, Pamela, can I walk with you? Are you on your way somewhere? All I could think of was why he'd have the least bit of interest in walking with me when he had the likes of Danielle Higgins. It had to be Emily. I mean, like I said, everyone's a sucker for a puppy. Sure, if you want to, I'm on my way home. The end of this completely unbelievable story is that Matt Layton walked all the way down Ross Road with me, down Hoskins, and down my street to my house. Sometimes he carried Emily. Sometimes I did, and for a little stretch she waddled between us. Standing outside of my house, he talked about his dog, Swat. He talked about his job at the Westview Safeway. He told me he'd seen me many times in the canyon, lying on the white rock down by 90 Foot, soaking up the sun, looking very content with my life. He told me he goes there a lot himself. Just to figure things out. And he never once mentioned Danielle Higgins. Then he said, well, see you. And I said, yeah, see you. And that was that. And I discovered that I really like him. I mean, aside from his wicked grin and perfect body, I'm sitting here with Emily on my lap, trying to figure out what that entire thing was actually all about. Chapter 16, June 10th. Joanne's grounded Saturday night and can't go to Mike Ortega's party. This means I won't be able to go with John Roble. Oh, poor me, I'm in such distress. She called Mr. Bartell a slippery old coot, and it got back to her mom. I was there in gym class when it happened. We were doing the swing and social dance, and this time Joanne got Mr. Bartell for her partner. It was pretty funny to watch. Mr. Bartell ripped her around the gym much faster than when I danced with him. He huffed and puffed and yelled out instructions, that is, whenever he could catch his breath to talk. He taught us half rotations, wraps and unwraps, rows, and the double cross. He demonstrated single unders and double unders, and all the time he had this real happy look on his face. In fact, he was so into it, I wondered why he didn't teach at a dance studio, instead of boring old English to us. Joanne had this totally serious expression, sort of like this get me out of here or I might throw up look on her face. I had to giggle with everyone else, although I did feel just a twinge of sympathy, having been there myself. I mean, the sweat and the breath and everything. So what happened was Mr. Bartell did one of those double under things and suddenly swung Joanne away from him. Joanne's hand slipped from his, she lost her balance, and she fell on her butt. Mr. Bartell helped her get back up again. He apologized all over the place. He felt real bad about it, I could tell. He said it was his fault. She wasn't expecting it, and he should have warned her. But from experience, I suspected differently. Because of the major sweat factor involved, it was hard to hang on to his hand. Whatever. He told us to get into partners, and he let Joanne go. I know Joanne was real embarrassed, and that's what made her as mad as she was. She was angry with herself more than Mr. Bartell. Still, as she walked back towards us, she muttered, it wouldn't have happened if he wasn't such a slippery old coot. She didn't know that Mr. Bartell was standing directly behind her, which would have been all right because he didn't hear her. The problem was, Danielle did. And because Danielle had never gotten over the fact that Steve Adler had gone for Joanne and not her, she would never miss a chance to humiliate her, not one chance in her entire life. Facing Joanne, watching Mr. Bartell come up behind her, Danielle stepped forward. What did you say, Joanne? I said I fell because he's a slippery old coot. Everyone around her went quiet, including Mr. Bartell. It was one of those situations you wish you could rewind and live through over again, after considering if it was worth hurting whoever got hurt. Joanne? Mr. Bartell said after a few silent moments. His scraggy beard was tilted in the air, and his thin lips were set tight. Joanne's eyes grew huge as she realized he had heard what she said. She was silent as she turned around. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. She nodded quietly. Uh-huh. Yes, I'm all right. Thank you. Mr. Bartell clapped his hands. All right, class, let's hop to it. Come on, come on. It's time to swing, everyone. But he didn't seem nearly as enthusiastic as he was before. Joanne turned back towards us, her eyes borne to Danielle, declaring total killer war. Mr. Bartell didn't phone Mrs. Robertson or anything like that. What happened was Linda went over to Joanne's house after school. Joanne told me all this in really major detail about 2 hours ago on the phone. They were sitting in the family room looking through old issues of YM. Out of the blue, Linda just started to giggle. Not about anything as far as Joanne could tell. Mrs. Robertson was getting supper ready in the kitchen. It's separated from the family room by a low rail. What's so funny? Joanne asked her. Linda kept giggling. I was just thinking of the look on Bartell's face when you called him a slippery old coot. Joanne's mom looked up from chopping a green pepper. Joanne even told me she was chopping. She saw her mom looking and listening, and the ways her eyes got narrow, Joanne made crazy signals for Linda to be quiet. Old coot, no kidding. I thought those old eyeballs would pop right out. Joanne, Mrs. Robertson said. I knew exactly the tone she used, like the time we spray painted the front door orange, was how Joanne described it. Joanne jumped up. Mom, don't worry about it. He never even heard me. Joanne's mom placed one hand on a hip. Linda was like totally oblivious to Mrs. Robertson. What are you talking about? She kept on laughing. Of course he heard you. When Joanne's mom heard that, she got this real hostile look. By now, Joanne was fuming. Linda, will you shut up? Joanne Robinson, I am ashamed of you. How could you say such a thing to your teacher? Mrs. Robertson waved her chopping knife in the air. Oops, said Linda. Thanks, said Joanne. Well, gee, Linda looked at her watch. It's getting real late. I guess I better go. I hope you apologize, said Mrs. Robertson after Linda left. You did apologize, didn't you? Well, sort of. You didn't, did you? Well, not in so many words. Mrs. Robertson pulled the telephone book from out of a drawer. Well, in so many words, you're going to do it right now. She brought it to Joanne in the family room and dropped it in her lap. Look him up. Mom, I can't call Mr. Bartell. It's only going to be a negative experience. You listen to me, young lady. I'll have many more negative experiences in store for you if you don't phone and apologize to your teacher right now. Honestly, I'm embarrassed. How do you think this reflects on me and your dad? According to Joanne, that was the very minute Mr. Robertson picked to walk in the door, and like Joanne and me agreed, Dads usually aren't too swift at cluing into these kinds of situations. What reflects on me? Mr. Robertson said cheerily, hanging his jacket. Her charming good looks? By this time, Mrs. Robertson was really riled. The fact that your daughter called her teacher an old coot. I didn't mean anything by it. How was he supposed to know that? It was then that Mr. Robertson got the idea that maybe something was just a tad wrong. He held up his hands. Okay, wait a minute. What did you call him? Joanne didn't answer. An old coot, said her mom. Really? Her dad bit his lips so as not to smirk. Paul, it's not funny. You're only encouraging her insolent behavior. Joanne, you're grounded for a week. What? That's not fair. I didn't mean to say it. It just came out. I don't even know what coot means. I got it from Dad. Me? With this totally ticked off expression, Mrs. Robertson faced Mr. Robertson. She folded her arms. Joanne sounded real stern when she repeated what her mom said. And just who were you calling an old coot? Mr. Robertson didn't answer. Who was your dad calling an old coot? Joanne? Her mom was so stressed, Joanne had no choice but to answer. Grandma. Joanne's dad gave her this demon look like she was some kind of traitor or something. My mother? You called my mother an old coot? I don't believe this. How did I get dragged into this? Answer me, Paul. Did you call my mother an old coot? Joanne's dad didn't answer. He just made this face at Joanne. Paul! All right, I may have. Just once. Just once? Yeah, the time she stood over my back when I was laying her tile floor. It's too far to the left. It's too far to the right. That piece is cracked. Shouldn't the corner come up a bit? It's not level. Do you even know what you're doing? Man, it was all I could do, not to tell the old coot to do it herself. My mother is not an old coot. She's a perfectionist, that's all. She's an old coot. What are you going to do, Susie? Ground me too? Mr. Robinson didn't get grounded, but from what Joanne said, their supper was real intense tonight. She phoned me again 5 minutes ago. She's still grounded except for Saturday night. She told her mom, get this, that I was really looking forward to Ortega's party because I'd met some guy I really liked. She didn't want to disappoint me by not being able to go. Mrs. Robertson is a pushover when it comes to me, and Joanne knows it. She'd do somersaults off a springboard if she thought it would make me laugh. She'd do anything to make me happy, including letting Joanne break her curfew. So, I guess I'm going to be seeing John Roble Saturday night.